I knew nothing about Muslims.
Yeah.
I couldn't even say that I loved Turks. I didn't even know
Mm.
anything about Turks. So in the early days, I was struggling with being there and just like, I don't even know these people group. But when I made my first friend was, Aisha. Then suddenly this love for Turks had a face to it.
Yes.
Then after I met my second friend, we became friends. And so I know that there are people there that say, "Oh, I just love Turks. I want to go serve them." I'm not like that, but I'm committed to the Aishas and the Fatmas and
Right.
these Turkish people who have names and faces and families,
Yes.
and I'm committed to seeing them come into the kingdom.
Hi guys, Matt here from Frontiers. Welcome back to Raw Mission, where you can hear encouraging and challenging stories of Jesus' followers taking the good news to the ends of the earth. From the miraculous to the mundane, from the heartbreaking to the awe-inspiring, we'll bring you the whole spectrum of real-life stories from ordinary, broken, beloved workers who are persevering day in, day out to see the name of Jesus exalted and Muslims come to faith in him. And today I'm joined by Diana, who spent several years in China and then over 20 years in Istanbul, a mega city in a country with 74 million Muslims, most of whom have never met a follower of Jesus. We'll be discussing what it's like to be a Chinese-American family living in a Muslim country and the joys and challenges of raising girls there. Well, welcome back everyone, and I'm delighted to have Diana with me today. And Diana is a new friend, someone I've not come across until recently, but friends have said to me, you must interview Diana. She's got a great story of her many, many years overseas and just interesting stories that she's got. So hi, Diana. Nice to see you this morning.
Yeah, nice to see you too, Matt. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, very well. Yeah. Now, I know you're not speaking to me from where you usually live. I don't know if you're allowed to say where you are right now, but thanks for joining me anyway. Tell us a little bit about your background, perhaps. Maybe just to start with, tell us how you got interested in Muslims.
Actually, through a back door, meaning I was actually serving in the Chinese world in Asia. And then I connected with my husband when I was on home assignment back in the States, and he was getting ready to leave for Turkey. And the Lord just brought us together, and we were courting, and he said to me, "Well, I'm on my way to Turkey. If you want, I would love it to go with you and be married." And so I married into our organization, actually, and into Muslim ministries.
Okay, that's really interesting. How old were you around about that kind of time then? In your 20s or 30s, perhaps?
No, we were both in our early 30s.
Okay, yeah. And had
Yeah.
you been living in Asia and serving in Asia, or did you grow up in Asia?
Nope. I actually am a Chinese American, born and raised in America. And so going to Asia was a new experience for me, learning the language, learning Chinese. I was there for 4 years with another organization,
Okay.
working with the house churches in China.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
What was that like? Just tell us a little bit. I mean, was that when you came back to the States, were you fully expecting to go back to Asia and work with the Chinese house churches? And that was a bit of a shock for you then to
Yeah.
get married and end
Yeah.
up in Turkey?
It was. But I think what made it work was just my husband and my desire to work with the unreached and the unengaged.
Mm.
And I think that was how I was able to reconcile my own personal calling with my husband's. And so after 2 short months of being married, we were off to Istanbul, Turkey as
Wow.
newlyweds. Yeah.
Gosh, interesting. And had you ever been to Turkey before?
No. So that's the surprising thing is we tried to arrange maybe a vision trip, see how I would
Mm.
like it, but no, we just didn't have the time and it didn't work out logistically. So I
Mm.
landed not knowing anything about Islam, about
Wow.
Muslims,
Mm.
about Muslim women, and nothing. So
That's in the deep end, thrown into the deep end.
yes, yes.
And had your husband been out there before or served out there?
Yeah, he had been there for 3 or 4 months. So he was actually new to the field as well.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah.
Okay, so what was that like, landing in a mega city, Istanbul, with millions and millions of Muslims all around you? Yeah.
Um, Landing in an urban setting wasn't bad because I was used to that in Asia. But
Mm,
I think one of the biggest differences was the Chinese world. They don't actually have very much physical contact. So I just remember arriving and getting a
mm.
warm welcome from my teammates, the women on my team, and suddenly these strange women that I didn't know were hugging and kissing me. And that just was really hard. I was like, wait a second, why are they kissing my cheeks?
Yeah,
So yeah, it was quite a bit of a culture shock.
interesting.
But as I look back, I think because Turkish culture is actually is Eastern, and so there's
Mm,
very many similarities
mm,
between the Eastern culture of Turkey
mm,
and Chinese. And in
mm.
fact, Turks originally are from the northwest part of China.
Oh,
So
really?
whenever people would meet us, they would ask us, "Oh, where are you from?"
Mm,
And then we would say, "Oh, actually, in Turkish, when you ask where are you from, it actually means where are your original roots." And
mm,
so we would say China, and they would say, "Oh, we're brothers, we're
mm.
sisters," because they know that they've originally come from that part of China.
Wow, that I didn't know that. That's really interesting. And give us some examples of how Eastern cultures are similar in that way than Turkey and China, because not many people would think there are that many parallels. But are you thinking to do with honor, perhaps, or
Yeah, honor,
relationships with
shame.
families,
Yep,
hospitality?
both honor, shame cultures, high emphasis on family.
Mm,
And family's just really central to their cultures and sense of belonging, respect for elders,
mm.
and just status and age. And yeah, those are just really important values for both cultures.
Yeah. So, in a sense, your Chinese connections, your Chinese heritage, even though you grew up in the States, was a real blessing for you, and yeah, a source of, I suppose, wisdom for you moving to a place like Turkey, because you could understand lots of those things that, for example, us who might not have that background, we have a lot to learn in Asian cultures. Even in Pakistan, I feel like, yeah, I was scratching the surface of some of those elements of the honor shame culture.
Yeah, it so that provided in some ways an easy inroads to the culture. I would say one particular cultural value that the two cultures share is they're much more collective in decision making, in
Mm,
getting ownership for anything, or I know a simple example would be holiday, taking a holiday or traveling together, and the decision was made as a group, versus more individualistic
mm,
societies like America or you know uh, Great Britain.
yeah.
So we could understand when you're talking about sharing faith and how it's not necessarily an individual decision, but it's a
Mm,
like a family decision. And so much of our relationship building was along social networks and family lines. And we would take advantage of huge family events like weddings or
mm,
circumcisions, and take that as an opportunity to meet people in their family networks.
mm,
And maybe our particular friend wasn't interested in spiritual things, but maybe their cousin, their
mm.
aunt, their neighbor. So we were just trying to follow kind of social lines in trying to share the gospel.
Yeah, that's interesting. In terms of, yeah, networks, because so often I think that there have been mistakes made by Western workers who don't fully understand collectivistic cultures, and
Yeah.
in the sense that we've got one guy interested here in the gospel, or another guy here interested, and they have no connection to each other. They're from different tribes or family networks, and we try and pull these 4 or 5 spiritually open people together and form them into some kind of church, and it often doesn't work, does it? Because they don't click,
No.
they don't naturally get on. And or even if they do, and you overcome the disunity, the natural disunity, they can't really spread the gospel and bring others in because they don't trust each other.
Yeah. But then you're seeing now mega cities cropping up and people from the villages coming to metropolitan areas. And so then the family network or the family ties are less strong. And so it definitely takes a different type of strategy to meet people and see the gospel travel through natural social networks.
Yes. Yeah, that's so interesting. I think we need to do a whole podcast on urbanization and the impact that has on trying to work well with communities and family lines and networks. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so you had already learnt one of the Chinese languages when you went over to China for 4 years, and then you found yourself in Istanbul. Did you dig into Turkish at that point?
Yes. So again, that was, we were fortunate to find a private tutor for me. So we didn't have children at the time. And so I worked with a university student who had a tiny bit of English. I mean, in the days when we went out, there was no internet, and English was hardly ever spoken in our part of the city.
Yeah.
And so it was really, which was a good thing. I think new workers going to the field today have the challenge of how do I learn language well when so many people in big cities, for example, speak English.
Yeah.
But we didn't have that challenge because hardly anyone spoke English where we were.
Yeah.
So.
And what was it like? You moved into a tower block or a house in a neighborhood then in a part of Istanbul, and how did it work getting on with neighbors there, or did you both find jobs to make natural relationships?
We lived in a 5-story apartment building. So most people live in flats or apartments, small apartments in Istanbul. And usually the apartment buildings had stores underneath it. So the first ground level would be a store. It could be a market. It could be a shoe repair store. And then above it would be all the flats. And so it was really ideal for language learning, because all you would have to do is go downstairs and then just talk with shopkeepers and practice your language. So we were in a middle-class neighborhood for 2 years, devoted to full-time language. And my husband, at that time, we could be tourist. So we would go in and out every 3 months, just go across the border, get another stamp in our passport, and then come back in for another 3 months, which served us well in terms of just a short break. It could be just a weekend or overnighter from where we were living, and then come back in. But then eventually we ended up, my husband started a business with a Turkish believer 2 years after our language learning time.
Okay.
So
so that enabled you to get a different visa platform.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And were you well accepted by the locals there?
Interestingly, the time that we went in the early 90s to Istanbul, in that part of the city, there weren't that very many foreigners. And so it was a bit hard. And then when we eventually had children, we have 2 girls, I think being like the only foreigners, and then being the only Asian foreigners for a long, long time was quite challenging, in that we got a lot of stares. Traffic would stop looking at us.
Really?
So it was, it felt really like living much more in a fishbowl than maybe a white Westerner would have felt for us.
Yeah.
So.
And how do you cope with that personally?
I think it was hard in terms of, there was good and bad in the curiosity of, oh, where are you from? And what do Chinese believe? And then when we would share a few cultural stories, there would be, oh, that's just like us. That's just like us. But so it really helped in terms of making friends, but just being out on the streets and in the market and stuff, it was hard when people would tease you about your eyes and the color of your hair, or I think our kids felt it more, maybe.
Yes. And as a mother, seeing that through the eyes of your children, you probably feel more defensive, more protective than just as an adult when you were just you and your husband. Perhaps.
Yeah. However, I think we realized, and we got some good advice earlier on, is that once you have language, and so once they knew, oh, wow, these Chinese looking people speak Turkish, and then you can have conversations with people, then it really helped with educating and dealing with people's ignorance about Asian people. And, they were just very open to learning. And once you were able to communicate in their language. So it was really important for us, for our girls to pick up the language earlier on.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I remember even in Pakistan, it's not the same. Absolutely. Sometimes as an American or as a Brit traveling overseas, a lot of people are like, oh, wow, that's great. We'd love to go to Britain, or I've got relatives in Britain or relatives in the States, or, there are some positive attitudes. Yeah. But even with white guys in Asia, a little bit of, oh, you're the colonial, and you get some hostile looks, certainly in the more Taliban supporting areas, where they just stare and they look at you and they just, they do not like Westerners.
Yeah.
So you have to overcome that with friendliness, don't you, and language and trusting.
Yeah, and I think that's why being Asian in Turkey was really a huge asset, especially after 9/11, when you knew just really was a game changer for those of us working in the Muslim world.
Yes.
But being identified as Chinese or Asian was definitely a plus.
Yeah.
However, we did hear the bad talk about the West Americans and that they deserved it, that whole narrative.
Yeah.
And so, but it provided an opportunity to bring people's focus back to, okay, well, God created us all.
Yeah.
So, we're all the children of God, and then just switch that whole nasty discussion to more spiritual topics. And so I think that was one way we were able to, begin and continue spiritual conversations.
Yeah, that's really good. I remember being given similar advice that, try and steer clear of politics. Don't get into, we're not there to defend Western politics, or
no,
we're there to share Jesus. And even we're not there to defend religion and say our religion's better than your religion, but we're there to preach Jesus and show Jesus and demonstrate Jesus. And okay. And how did being on a team help or hinder, or bring its highs and lows? Was it really good for you to be on a team? What did your team look like? Was it multicultural?
Well, we first joined an all-American team, and then we got new teammates. And so probably our second configuration of team was more multicultural. We had a German, we had a Latin, we had a Turkish believer actually join our team. I mean, not join our org, but join our fellowship times.
Yeah.
So then that was really quite challenging to be on a multicultural team. However, it just, as we were doing team together, as we were working together, as we were making friends together, as we were meeting more and more, I would say, non-Western workers coming to Turkey with other orgs, we just really appreciated a different flavor of their spirituality, a different way of seeing and walking with Jesus that really just helped our own walk with the Lord. And hearing their testimonies of God's faithfulness,
Mm.
God's mercy, God's provision, and just how how faith worked for them in their different cultural contexts, in their own families and their upbringings.
Mm.
It just, I don't know. And Luke, it talks about, how rich are you in your relationship with the Lord? And I just felt like our relationships with expat workers from different cultures just made my relationship with God more rich and more well-rounded.
Can you give an example in terms of, was it how they did prayer or how they worshipped, or anything that comes to mind?
I would say, that day in, day out work on the field, it's you just unconsciously find yourself thinking more and more, this is impossible. This is not going to work. Why try this? And yet I found, especially with our Latin and our Asian coworkers, they just, nothing is impossible for God. And they just always carried that aspect of God in their walks. And there was just like, nothing's impossible. Let's try it. So they were always pushing the edge when it came to what God was calling us to do, or what God was challenging us to trust him with. And I especially appreciated their perseverance. It just seemed like they never grew tired, grew weary of doing good. As we read, as Paul reminds us not to grow weary in doing good. And just having that live example in flesh and blood, side by side. And you're like, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Because a lot of times I think disappointments and failures on the field eat away at our core beliefs of, God is a big God. God is greater than what we can do.
Yes.
But our circumstances kind of just shrink God day in, day out, I think.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, to have team members is so helpful, isn't it? Whether it's just because physically we're struggling, or emotionally or spiritually or faith-wise, to have others who are in a slightly different walk at that moment to lift us up and encourage us when you don't feel like praying again, or or even different ways of worshiping and praying was really healthy. I'm not used to that. That's not my tradition, but it's a joy to learn different ways and avenues of worshiping the Lord that our brothers and sisters show us. Yeah, that's really good. What were some other highs? I think, were you there? How long were you there altogether in Istanbul?
We were probably full-time, maybe, I would say 25 years.
Wow.
We still have our flat there, and we take trips in and out because we supervise teams on the field right now.
Okay.
So we're not full-time on the field anymore.
But you go in and out.
Yeah, and we go in and out. Yeah.
Okay, so over those, that's amazing, 25 years. What will be some of the highs where you saw the Lord at work, whether in your own family, answering prayers, or some great opportunities with locals?
Yeah, I think one of the unusual things about our journey was that we were able to live pretty much those 25 years in the same neighborhood, same community. Wow. And so we have 25-year-old relationships with our Turkish friends. So that really helped in terms of developing. The Lord gave us favor and developing a good reputation in the area, a good relationship with like government officials, or like people at the post office, because you're going to the post office for the same post office for 25 years. And we were able not to just share in word, but also share in deed, as we got more involved in community issues that affected us because we lived there, whether it was okay, why can't we get, there was so much, we lived in a lower class neighborhood. And when we first moved, the garbage was a big issue.
Right.
And so just trying to get the local government to deal with the garbage issue on the streets. And then that just brought community ownership and relationships that we wouldn't have gotten if we were just, making friends one by one. But suddenly everyone on our block, we were meeting together over a common issue that impacted our lives. So I think we didn't see very much visible spiritual fruit in terms of people coming to faith. But I think, in this line of work, especially in our part of the world, you just don't know, as the word says, how God's word is not going to come back void in people's lives, and the kind of impact that you have in people's lives, and seeing families and marriages even more healthy because of our testimony in our marriage. I mean, so often I was asked by my Turkish friends, "Oh, does Eric beat you?"
Really? They asked you that directly?
Yeah, and they say, "What's the secret behind Eric, your husband, not beating you at home?"
Wow.
And I would share a lot of time together with women, sharing about marriage, raising our kids, there's obviously the challenge of in a collective society where grandmother and aunts and uncles have a say in how you raise your kids, and how are we how would we advise against having a stronger voice in your own children's upbringing, was a big topic as well. And I just remember reading one of Becky Lewis's articles and saying, time spent with women and their children, you don't know what's the children are going to pick up, and they might be the next generation's, the leaders of tomorrow's church there in that neighborhood. So we really tried to play more the long game, and just how could we invest in families and relationships where our impact was felt, kind of the ripple effect throughout a family network. So
that's really helpful. I think we're about the kingdom of God, aren't we? We're not just about numbers and it's a horrible word, conversions. We want to make disciples, of course, but it's often a gradual process, and the effect of the kingdom of God and families who follow Jesus, just it's constant, and it should be constant, but it's not always visible. There's so many parables Jesus shares, aren't there, about the sort of invisible things that are happening, and then perhaps while we're sleeping, the Lord will make it grow, and the harvest comes later.
I mean, one of the I guess we would consider it a compliment was the word went out in our community. Oh, Eric and Diana are such good Muslims. They put us to shame. They're people of prayer. They are people of the word. They're people who worship and fear God. And so it's just, okay, you start there. And then, you begin with, just having opportunities where women would say, I checked with my Hoja, my religious teacher, and he was saying it's okay to pray in the name of Jesus. I know you pray in the name of Jesus. So, just knowing that we were people of prayer opened up opportunities of who you pray to, through whom do you pray, and answers to prayer. And I think that was also another pathway into sharing about Jesus, and giving to the poor, which was always kind of a touchy subject, but just how money can sometimes spoil or corrupt friendships. And so you had to be really careful about that, especially working among the lower class or the poor in any situation. So
tell us more about that, because we want to have the heart of compassion that we see in the Gospels, and we want to express that in our communities. But how did you see that? How did you get that balance of wanting to be compassionate and give, but not spoiling the relationships and people just thinking you're coming to give money with ulterior motives or something like that?
Well, I think our first family decision was whatever money we loan out, let's not expect to get it back. Because I know that sometimes you can loan money with the expectation of getting it back. And when it doesn't come back, it can eat at your own heart, right?
Yes.
So anytime we gave money out, we knew that we would be surprised if it came back. And then just working with the poor, again, like you said, Matt, it's how do you, especially as Westerners with more, how can you not be sensitive to their physical needs?
Yeah.
But a lot of times, there's a barter system in Turkey, and we would do that too. And we always took the position of being a learner. So say someone couldn't pay back, money that I gave for groceries. It was like, you know what? This is how you can help me. Teach me how to cook this Turkish dish. Yeah. Give me time. And, this is how you can help me. You can, I need to run to the market. Can you watch my kids? And so just for them to know that they can help me in tangible ways was a way that they could feel good about not paying back our debt.
That's excellent. I love that. That's really, really good, because it's honoring to them, isn't it? It's not, you're always in my debt. I hold all the power. I hold the money. And actually that taps into this understanding of a patronage client environment where you might be able to offer something, but they can offer support and trust, and they can give you a good name in the community, and they can give things back to you, even if it's not money. And that's really good to think about, because I would never have thought about that going into Asia. Yeah. And
then also our girls went to a Turkish school. And so when I had issues at school with teachers, I would be going to them for advice. I have this problem, and, how would you advise me to deal with the teacher? And, so they were always, pouring into our lives in different ways as we were pouring into their lives in different ways.
That's brilliant. And that's probably why you stayed there so long in some ways, because if you don't have favor in the community and with government officials at all levels, then it's much easier for people to be just pushed out of a country, isn't it? Because you don't have much support or a good name.
I think with China and Turkey, that you have to believe that the governments, any of these governments, are tracking what Westerners are doing in their country. And so I think for maybe about 5 or 6 years, the secret police were tracking my husband. And they would just ask neighbors and neighbors of our office, is this guy, hosting big meetings in the office? Is he passing out literature to people? And so you basically, they knew where we lived. They could ask us directly. And yet our neighbors and our friends in the community would be, I don't know what you're talking about. His company, they're helping with the local school and supplying, free notebooks and pencils for the kids, and his company. And, oh, Miss Diana, oh, I know that she's helping at the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association, and they help with. So when you have good social friends, networks, and the neighborhood is behind you and who you are as people, then it really helps with dealing with the authorities and because they're checking on you ever so often. So
yeah, definitely. Just thinking about, you were in an environment of, I sometimes think of it as clearing rocks, let alone sowing seeds. And I'm sure you were sowing lots of seeds too. But, there's a lot of rock clearing. People, until they've ever met a Christian, they don't even want to hear about Jesus or the gospel. They've got so many barriers from what they've heard through their childhoods about what Christians are or what they believe. So, just all those relationships, serving your community, that's really softening their hearts towards the gospel as it comes, whether it's coming through you guys or another team in 10 years' time, or Turkish believers who've come to know Jesus moving into that area of Istanbul. So, in faith, we look forwards, we play the long game. But
Yeah.
how do your home churches view that? Did you have, most of your supporters back home patient, understanding of what you were doing?
Well, I would say all are supporting churches. And yeah, I mean, we went out in the early 90s. We were like the first people to go to a Muslim country, actually. So they didn't know anything about Muslim ministry or how do you share with a Muslim. And then, of course, all that changed after 9/11. And then suddenly people in the States are like, oh, do you have any tips on how to share? And for me, how do I share with my Muslim coworker at work?
Right.
But yeah, it's been challenging. For one, the language, don't call us M's, call us, overseas workers or businessmen, because my husband was running a business in Turkey. But I think the hardest thing was people wanting immediate fruit. Like, oh, how many Bible studies did you start this year? And how many big events did you have where, did 50 people come to hear you sharing? And so I think measurements and metrics are different when you're talking about Muslim ministry.
If you're enjoying this podcast, why not give us a 5-star rating so that more folks can hear these inspiring stories and join us in praying, sending, giving, and going? Or how about inviting me or one of my colleagues to speak at your church? I'd love to hear from you. Email me on matt@frontiers.org.uk. And now back to the podcast.
But I think the hardest thing was people wanting immediate fruit. Like, oh, how many Bible studies did you start this year? And how many big events did you have where, did 50 people come to hear you sharing? And so I think measurements and metrics are different when you're talking about Muslim ministry. And just, again, we were saying, our goal is to get to the second conversation, because Muslims have such stereotypes, some of it warranted, some not, about Christians. And so, for example, we never called ourselves a Christian, but we called ourselves a follower of Jesus. And they'd be, in Turkish, and they'd be, oh, what's that? I don't know that religion. So we were always trying to stay out of typical categories just to get to the second, third, fourth conversation. Well, tell us, what does faith look like as a follower of Jesus? And then we were able to share, well, actually we take his word very seriously. And so a lot of times we'd wait till when we were pressed against the wall to say, oh, yeah, this verse is from the New Testament, because they have, they believe the New Testament is corrupted. But we'd say, well, let me just tell you a story of Jesus's. We'd do parables, did a lot of scripture memory in Turkish, because, in the lower class neighborhood, hardly anyone was literate. And so it was just orally sharing faith through stories and parables and memorized verses and all that. And through prayers, we did a lot of sharing through the Psalms to get to the Gospels. So
it's all part of this long game, isn't it? Patience and sowing the seeds and so on. And I think sometimes our churches, if when we sit down and we talk to them, it makes sense to them. But you were probably there 25 years. You probably had different mission committees and different mission pastors, and some will understand it and others won't.
And then, they're doing their due diligence of hearing different mission strategies and that different organizations are doing in this country or that country. And they would ask us a lot about that. And, we just caution that the soil is different in different lands, in different countries, among different people groups. And what you read that's quote unquote successful in one country or among one people group may not work where we are.
True.
And just trying to educate and say that, the goal is just to be good news, shine the light in darkness, in word and in deed, and seeing how God leads us the next step strategically in
Yes.
what to do.
Yeah, and to make the most of every opportunity. And the good thing about Muslim countries
Exactly.
is there are plenty of opportunities to speak about God and faith in
Yeah.
Jesus. They do come all the time. Now, yes, people aren't falling into the kingdom. I mean, of course, there are some exceptions now, praise God, in the Muslim world where
Yeah.
lots and lots of exciting fruits happening. But in the majority of the Muslim world, there's hostility. There's a lot of skepticism towards our holy books and our faith and so on. And if all you've ever experienced as a church leader is a short-term trip to Southern Africa, where you have a big stadium event and you jump in, you're the speaker, and everyone comes forward and raises their hands and wants to follow Jesus, you think, well, that's mission. So surely all our mission partners around the world should be doing that kind of thing. Well, no, it's a bit more complex than that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think we found, so what was surprising is I find that we have more spiritual conversations with people in Turkey than we do in America.
Yes.
I mean, they ask you, what's your name? How much rent do you pay? What's your salary? And then what do you believe? And then of course, being Asian, they would be, are you Buddhist or, and so then it was like, oh, no, we're not. And then, then we would start and they would be, oh, I've never heard of follower of Jesus. What does that mean? And then we're off and running.
It's true. Yeah, it really is quite easy to chat about faith.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you see any little anecdotes of amazing provision, protection that you had, where you saw the Lord really answer prayer?
There's so many, but I think one that sticks out to me is, and this is part of you think something is moving ahead well in terms of relationships in the gospel. So we were able to connect with a community center in our neighborhood. And their goal was to help kids in school. So they would run tutorial sessions after school. On the weekends, they would offer music lessons or playing soccer leagues, just to keep the kids off the street and to keep them growing academically. So we were asked, oh, could you host some English lessons? So my husband and I were doing that. And then just having a real impact in the community, meeting so many different families and having opportunities to share. And then one night, my husband just bolted out of bed and he was like shaking and he had a nightmare. And his nightmare was we were at the community center and then all of a sudden we were leaving the community center and then the roof of the community center just bursted open and this huge snake came out of it. And then his nightmare ended. And he's just like, I was so scared when I saw this huge snake come out. Wow. So Turks, they're really into interpreting dreams and all that.
Yeah.
So one of our good friends at the community center, we were sharing this dream. And I asked her, oh, what do snakes represent? And so she said, well, it's not good. And so she said, I would suggest that you just not come to the community center for a while. Why don't you just, tell the director that, you're going to take a break from giving English lessons and all that.
Okay.
Well, just a couple of weeks later, the director was arrested on terrorism charges.
Wow.
And his political leanings. I'm not sure if they were true, or maybe there were charges based on something he did 20 years ago. Or something. But we felt like that was one way that the Lord protected us and our identity and who we were there in the community, just in time.
That's powerful.
So it's just things through dreams or, as the Spirit leads and just, oh, wow, there was a huge accident on the road, 3 minutes ago where we were walking and, things like that. There's just so many to tell, but he protects his people where he wants them to be. And so that encourages more, I think, risk taking. There was a time when there was just a huge Kurdish problem in Turkey, and we were traveling on a bus, and we were local people were saying you shouldn't travel on this bus because a bus before you that left the day before us was blown up through the valley. And we just prayed about it, and you just have to believe that God wanted us to take the bus through the valley, even though it didn't work out so well for the people the day before. And we were fine, even though the bus was stopped and searched and all that, but we were fine.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to trust, isn't it? Like you say, and to just trust that our shepherd will guide us, and it doesn't guarantee we won't have problems or troubles. I remember, similar to that, actually, you just reminded me. Sometimes there were Sunni and Shia problems, big fighting, sectarian violence, where we were in North Pakistan. And sometimes we'd hear, don't ride on that bus, that's owned by the Shias. And that, last week the Shia buses were stopped and people were pulled out and shot because they were Shia, not Sunni. And you think, well, I mean, I'm not going to choose my bus based on who the owner is and is he Sunni or Shia. You just got to trust God. And, and of course, if you're in the situation, you probably hope that, well, no, like I'm a foreigner. Usually that's not a good thing to admit, perhaps straight up, but in that situation, maybe it would. But and that's interesting.
Yeah, and those, and that was also another area of being able to share the gospel, just the ethnic tensions, the Shia and Sunni factions in our countries, Muslim countries, but just being able to share what is true reconciliation, and being able to share, God brought the Jews and Gentiles together into one family. And, because that was often a lot of times, because we had friends in both camps, Sunni friends and Shia friends. And how can you be friends with them?
Right.
And then it was an opportunity again, coming back to our identity as God's people,
Yes.
So
no, that's true. They always want you to sort of side with them and help these community, and they're very happy when you do. But then when they hear you're also helping the other community, wait, that's not right. We thought you were on our side. Well, we are on your side, but we're on their side too. We're not taking sides, actually. Okay. Tell us a bit more about raising two daughters in the Muslim world. How did they find that? Was it quite a conservative area where you were in Istanbul? I mean, some parts of the Muslim world, ladies wander around and ride on motorbikes and run snack stands, and other places they've got to be really well covered and so on. What was it like for your daughters?
Well, okay, so 25 years, it was quite conservative when we landed there in our area, but then over the years, it's become not as conservative. I thought it was fine. And that it wasn't really actually a problem. Our girls had gone to local schools, they knew the language, the culture. So you fast forward, and our girls are now 27 and 25. And they're now, I think they have the language and the maturity to be able to communicate with us that it wasn't fine.
Yes.
And that certain incidences growing up there. So we're hearing this, 10, 15 years later, and like, oh my gosh, this was going on. Just growing up in a Muslim country and not feeling safe.
Right.
And so I think that's just something that we need to be aware of. And
did they explain how? How did they not feel safe?
Well, one of our daughters was sexually assaulted at a bus stop.
I'm sorry.
And at the time, she shared a little bit about it. And, we were like, are you okay? And, but she didn't share fully what had happened. So now 10, 15 years later, she's sharing, and all these other incidences. And it was, maybe because they had the local language, the cat calls, the invitations from men yelling at them as they're walking by on the street. Interestingly, also just the way men looked at them made them feel very insecure and not safe. So very subtle, just the environment and how men see women, men treat women,
Mm,
was just very difficult for them. Now, as they're looking back and struggling with their own issues to trust and feel
mhm,
safe and comfortable,
mhm.
even in America now,
Yep,
because
yep,
you have that same issue with men and women, I think, anywhere in the world.
yes,
But because I think they were exposed to it at an earlier age,
yep.
um, and now they're connecting the dots of,
Mm,
oh, when our Turkish neighbor friend came over and said this to me,
mm,
and that it just how it made them feel uncomfortable, and then
right.
all these little things adding up to a big pool of
Hmm.
not feeling safe and comfortable wherever they are.
Yeah,
But
that's
they're
so.
working through it. They're in a
Mhm.
healing process, seeing a
Mm,
counselor, and still walking in faith and just believing
mm,
that God's going to bring wholeness in that part of their lives. So we're
mm.
thankful for that. And we're thankful for the fact that they're sharing it with us versus 10 years from now saying, Mom and Dad, we have something to tell you, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. No, definitely. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's very tough to go through wherever you've grown up and
Yeah.
whatever cultural background that's coming from. I don't know if, yeah, where you were in Turkey, you'll never know what that would have been like if they were in the States or somewhere else. I mean, I
Yeah.
know from my own experiences in South Asia that women are often, yeah, touched in public,
Yeah.
and they have to be incredibly careful. Even when I was married, we had to be very careful walking around, um, with our wives, or whoever, or
Yeah.
guests if they were female, just especially in crowded markets and so on.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was talking to one of my close friends about it. And she always had these straight pins on the edge of her scarf. She was covered with a scarf.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying, it happens to me all the time. So, my friend, she's a little overweight and, probably, late 40s.
Yeah.
And she goes, it happens all the time on the buses. And so she goes, I just take my straight pin out and just jab the guy. I was like,
Wow.
oh, is that how you handle it? She goes, oh, yeah.
Awesome. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, in on the subcontinent in India and Pakistan, the way that a woman would react if she felt inappropriately touched on it,
Mhm.
often they just pick up their sandal off their shoe and hold it
Yeah.
up, or say, "Do you not have a sister at home?" or something, and then
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
then
yeah,
all
yeah,
eyes will turn on the guy that's perhaps just
yeah.
done that, and then you get some community help and support. But it is really
Oh, yeah,
important, I think,
yeah,
for ladies to understand what are the local ways to deal with this kind of pressure,
yeah,
and what are the words you should say, what are the actions you should take that will get you some protection from the
yeah.
community.
Which is what our daughter did at the bus stop, where the older
Yeah.
ladies came around and shooed the
uh,
guy away. But,
Good.
that was
Yeah,
after the fact,
it's after, yeah, exactly. Yes,
So,
and these are just good things to be aware of. What are
yeah,
the prevailing attitudes in this particular society? It might be one part of the country, it might be one type of village mentality. So we can't tar everyone with the same brush, but they're good questions to ask. What is the prevailing mentality here? What do they think about women? Do they consider it okay to beat their wives here, and why? And those are good
yeah,
questions to ask. We're not going to go into that now, but there might
yeah.
be theological, cultural, historical things behind that, and they're worth exploring so that we can protect ourselves and our families from those kind of attitudes.
Yeah. Well, the good thing too is both our daughters are saying they don't regret growing up in Turkey at all,
Mm,
even though they're sharing the hard side of it. It's home for them. They were born and raised there.
yep.
Um, they just would not have changed anything. I
Yeah.
mean, so they go to America for university studies, and they're like,
Okay.
"This is a crazy place,"
Yeah.
and we're just, and
Yes.
they have taken away the way that they just life's lessons and how they're equipped
Mm,
for life, and because of their experiences in Turkey, and so
yeah.
we appreciate that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other stories you want to share before we come to land? And I find out what you're doing now in your ministry as well. But any other key anecdotes, major problems, things you look back on with deep sadness on your time out there, or yeah, real joy. Either one. We'd love to hear either.
Yeah. Um, I think one thing, especially in Muslim ministries, we all want to see fruit. We all
Yeah.
want to see visible fruit.
Mm.
And I think that's just any of us battle with that when you're not
Mm.
seeing the fruit.
Yeah.
And I just remember we were having lunch with a good friend of ours with another org, and we were sharing about how our love for local people kind of peaks and wanes,
Mm.
especially, depending on what's happening. And I
Mm.
think it was a time when I think we're all struggling to love Turks.
Mm.
And he's just said, and he had been in Turkey for years now too. And he says, I think what's important for us as workers is, he goes, every night when I put my head down on my pillow, I ask myself, was I faithful to do what God wanted me to do today?
Mm.
And I think that's just a huge lesson wherever we are,
Mm.
but especially when we're workers overseas. And, are we leaning into Jesus? Are we hearing what he wants us to do today? We're
Mm.
just being faithful and just leave the results up to him,
Yes.
And I just think it's a lesson I pass on to my girls. I remind them all the time that as you're just trying to shine light and be Jesus in dark areas,
Mm.
just be faithful to what you're supposed to do that day, and just
Mm.
keep at it.
Yes.
And the Lord knows, and he knows what's happening underneath
Mm.
the soil,
Yeah.
and that's him to sort out, not for us.
Yes.
And just being able to walk in faithfulness, I think it's
Yeah,
just
that's
one of the
right.
keys that kept us on the field, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he's the Lord of the harvest. We cannot
Yeah,
engineer a movement to Christ. We can be
no,
intentional. We can be bold. We're
definitely.
definitely called to be bold, and we're called to pray and ask the Lord and seek him so that we're not just doing everything in our own strength. But at the end of the day, he's the Lord of the harvest, and his sovereignty and his timing will
Amen.
win out. And we do know the end
Yeah,
of the story.
yeah.
We know what happens.
Amen.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, that's gold dust. That little phrase you just said there is really helpful, I think, for our listeners too, because just because we work overseas with a particular people group or language group doesn't mean we're always full of God's compassion for them. I love what you
Yeah,
said there about waxing and waning. There are highs and lows. Sometimes we feel so connected to, and this is true in the West, isn't it? Whether it's our
yeah.
local church or the community we live in, wherever we are, sometimes we feel deep connection to our local church, and other times we're kind of fed up with the people of God. They're really annoying, or
Yeah,
the
yeah.
leadership here is, and it's exactly the same as workers overseas. We're no different. We're not super spiritual. We don't walk around with, oh, I love everybody all the time.
Yeah,
And, we get
I know.
grumpy, we get fed up. And like Jonah, we grumble at God and say, this is not what I signed up for. So thank you for just, giving a little hint of,
Well,
that reality.
well, one thing I share a lot with women, because I think that there are women that go overseas and support their husbands, and they want to be a support to their husbands and their families. I was married into Muslim ministries. I knew nothing about Muslims.
Yeah.
I couldn't even say that I loved Turks. I didn't even know
Mm.
anything about Turks. So in the early days, I was struggling with being there, and just like, I don't even know these people group. But when I made my first friend was, Aisha. Then suddenly this love for Turks had a face to it.
Yes.
Then after I met my second friend and became friends, and so I know that there are people there that say, "Oh, I just love Turks. I want to go serve them." I'm not like that, but I'm committed to the Aishas and the Fatmas and
Right.
these Turkish people who have names and faces and families,
Yes.
and I'm committed to seeing them come into the kingdom. So I think it's just important.
Yeah.
Just if you can make your first friend, and then make your second friend and your third friend, that's when your love starts growing for, I think, a people group.
Definitely. That's great. Yeah. The Lord doesn't expect us to have downloaded a love for a certain people group, having never met them. It just doesn't work like that. We go in faith. We meet people, we find out they're just human, they're just like us, and then the love develops. Yeah, that's really good. Brilliant. Just give us a quick insight into what you guys do now.
So we've been on and off the field about 4 years now. And so we still oversee 4 teams in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And we're also helping to bring better connections in our org with our Latin and Asian workers, and trying to encourage more of a multicultural mindset in our org, in that many more of new workers are coming from Latin America and from Asia, and inshallah from Africa one day. And so we're just really wanting to help our org be prepared to receive and to train and see, better collaboration and connection among the different cultural groups in our org.
Yeah, it's been a huge growth, hasn't it? I mean, when I started with Frontiers back in 2002, I suppose, you would at the international conferences see the different languages and folks there, and wonderful to see so many Germans and Swiss and Brits and Canadians and so on. And there were definitely, I'm sure, Koreans and Latinos there, but in much smaller numbers compared to now, when it's really exciting to see the growth of the Latinos in global mission, but also within Frontiers. It's one of the things I'm really excited about. But to make sure that their voices are equally heard, and it's not just sort of too Western driven, because that was our foundation. We want to make sure that English isn't just so dominant that it excludes people. That's so important, isn't it?
So I think we're looking at systemic changes we're hoping for, as well as you said, hearing their voice as it applies to pursuing movements. I think that because Latin and Asian cultures are much closer to Muslim culture in general. And so I think that they have really great insights on how do you develop relationships? How do you develop inroads into communities? And I think that what they bring to that whole our work, and seeing the gospel travel through these family networks and stuff, I think a key part is hearing their voice and how we can do our work better on the ground.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm excited that in the next few weeks I'm going to have an Indian brother being interviewed, and I'm really excited to get his perspective as an Indian too, into the growth of the church, the state of the church in India, how we make disciples and see movements started. So this is great. No, thank you. Well, this has been a joy for me, and thank you for
the opportunity.
And I'm really just so pleased that you guys have been so faithful, and that you're still involved with us at Frontiers and going backwards and forwards, involved in leadership and shaping the future of the organization. And I really appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability today, sharing those stories. So,
well, thank you for the time, Matt. Appreciate it.
Great. All right. God bless. See you soon.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Now, every year we take teams into Turkey to explore and to pray for towns in the east where there are no churches and no followers of Jesus. Perhaps you could join one of these trips, or maybe gather a group of friends from your church or from your CU to go together. And in a few weeks' time, I'll be interviewing 3 young people who just got back from one of these adventures and had some amazing experiences. So look out for that one. As always, please do keep in touch. If you have any questions or ideas, or just want to connect with us, we're on all the usual social media platforms, or just email me, matt@frontiers.org.uk.